Oh, well, you, okay. I appreciate the global Europe, but I also do Canada, so sometimes I go to that as well. It's a small.
Well, welcome everyone. Thank you so much for the enthusiastic turnout, right on time, free time. I'm sure we're going to have more students filtering in as we go. But today is an incredibly exciting event for us. I'm Dean Shannon Hayter, the Dean of the School of International Service, and we are so excited by our guest here today. I think, as we all know, and have been experiencing in many, many ways, that our world these days is a complex and troubling place. President Biden said earlier this month, the world is at an inflection point. It may very well be at several inflection points all at once. And I think at times of difficulties and inflections, some of us shy away from some of the complex conversations, but at SIS, we want to really practice leaning in to these complex conversations. For those of you who aren't in SIS, we have a new departmental structure. And we call these departments without walls, because they're all interdisciplinary. There's a lot of exchange back and forth, but it's really our departments, the faculty, the expertise inside of these departments that will help us lean into these complex issues by strengthening the connectivity we have between our scholars, our students, our strong body of relationships and contacts, as evidenced by our illustrious speaker today. And so this event in particular is co-sponsored by two of our new departments, the Department of Foreign Policy and Global Security, and the Department of Politics, Governance, and Economics. And our approach is interdisciplinary. Complex problems, such as the way forward on Ukraine, require thinking about the regional and global dynamic, about how policies are enacted to meet countries' national interests and security concerns, and how that moves forward in a world filled with economic and political opportunities and constraints. So during 2022 and 2023, the Defense Minister Reznikov had one of the most challenging jobs in the world. Hearing directly from decision makers like Mr. Reznikov about the actual policy process helps our community bridge the gap between academic and theoretical thinking and the often brutal world of governing and implementing policy. So it is truly my pleasure to introduce Oleksii Reznikov. Sorry, I was trying to get it right. Oleksii Reznikov. He's a Ukrainian lawyer and politician who most recently served as Ukraine's Minister of Defense from November 21 to September 23. Prior to that, Mr. Reznikov served in various senior capacities in the government of Ukraine: Deputy Prime Minister, Minister for Reintegration of the Temporarily Occupied Territories of Ukraine, Deputy Head of the Kyiv City State Administration, and Deputy Mayor Secretary of the Kyiv City Council. Mr. Reznikov attended Lviv University, where he received a master's degree with honors in law. And in 2019, he received the Silver Cross of Merit from Poland. And in 2022, the Minister of Defense of Denmark awarded him with a medal for outstanding leadership during wartime. Please join me in welcoming Minister Reznikov.
Thank you very much. And you know that my dream was to give a speech in a TED Talks format, but there's a problem. They rule 18 minutes. I wrote the notes trying to give the speech to you. It was 1 hour and a half. I cut it 1 hour. I cut it 30 minutes. Cut it 20 minutes, maybe. So I will try to not to be so boring for you, but if you will see I'm boring, applaud. And I really would like to thank the organizers for the opportunity to meet here with you and with this wonderful audience. I had a test with a small group of students. They warm up me. So let's start. And I know that after that we will have some Q&A session. The question that became the title of our meeting is what next for Ukraine? Why is the answer important? Because the question really is what next for the world? For America, for Europe, for everyone who values democracy. The biggest mistake you can make is to read Russia's attack on Ukraine as a local conflict. That really isn't so. There is no local reason to have caused the war. To put it bluntly, there is no single territory that could be handed over to Russia and make the Kremlin say, okay, now we are satisfied, Russia will become a democracy, stop threatening the world with the nukes. There is not a single political demand it makes of Ukraine that once met would make Russians get out and leave everyone in peace. The Kremlin has two wishes, and they make no secret of them. First, they want the Ukrainian state to stop existing as a sovereign democratic alternative and Ukraine to stop existing as a nation. Second, they want NATO and the EU to fall. The Russian leadership believes that the existence of the free Ukraine, successful EU and NATO sets a bad example for Russian citizens. Therefore, this war cannot be stopped by freezing the conflict and starting negotiations between Russia and Ukraine. If we want peace, we have to win. I know it for certain. After all, I have spent 2 years preceding this full-scale invasion negotiation with the Russians. I was a member of the Ukrainian delegation in Minsk process. I was a deputy head of this delegation, and believe me, I know Russians. Let me remind you that in January 2022, Russia demanded that NATO pull back to its 1997 borders in January 2022. The demand had nothing to do with Ukraine and was obviously unacceptable. The solution offered in Ukraine will indeed become a model for the world at large. Human lives in Europe, in America, on every continent depend on the shape of this solution. In order to explore this issue further, I would like to focus on 3 blocks. First, there is the global dimension. How did we find ourselves at the juncture where there is a talk of World War III? What went wrong? Second, there is the issue of what Ukraine really is. Why are we still fighting even though nobody believed in us? And third, how do we set it all right? What are the possible scenarios and what we need to do? So let's begin with the point 1, the global dimension. Please raise your hands if you can find Ukraine on the map. Splendid. And now, please be honest and raise your hand if you could do so before February 2022. Impressive. I'm certain that the results may be radically different outside this hall. So how did the world end up on the brink of the catastrophe that made many think of World War III? And all because of an attack on a country that few could even find on the map. The reason is follows. You can often see the juxtaposition between rule of law and the rule of force in the international order, both in international documents and in the public rhetoric. But the line between rules and force is something blurry. The rules only stay in force as long as someone willing to defend them. The main question is what sort of rules are being defended? Who wrote them? For the last 8 decades, we will live according to the rules that were written by the victors of the World War II and expanded by the victors in the Cold War. They are now at the existential turning point. First, the international institutions created in the aftermath of the World War II have failed. the UN has failed as a mechanism for preventing a full-scale war that many believe to be impossible, especially in Europe. The OSCE, in its current shape, has no future. The treaties on nuclear security and the non-proliferation of the nuclear weapons have been undermined. Nuclear threats are no longer a rhetorical taboo. The member of the Security Council of UN has a veto right, and simultaneously, the leader of this country has a warrant of arrest from the Hague Criminal Court. It's absurd. Second, the balance of power formed in the aftermath of the Cold War has changed. Finland's and Sweden's accession to NATO symbolically marks the end of the previous balance of power. NATO had no meaningful opposition for 30 years. The opposition is here now, and it is posing the challenges that are just below the threshold for the conventional response. Just one example. Artificially directing migrations became a new kind of weapon against the countries that value human lives and dignity. This is the security threat. Nevertheless, the reaction follows the peacetime format that is of a humanitarian crisis response. The return of internal border control that the EU has been trying to erase for the last 30 years is a sign that we need a new model. Maybe you remember that from the Belarus, it was a threat to the Poland, the Lithuanian, Latvia using the migrants before the full-scale invasion. It was a really migrant as a weaponry, a new kind of weaponry in the world. The main threat to NATO is not a direct confrontation. It is the, I would say, nagging question of whether the alliance would be able to act if it needed to. You will remember that in NATO, you have to vote unanimously. The presence of characters like the Hungarian Prime Minister Orban could paralyze the alliance, which needs a consensus to pass a decision. Months ago, Russia had helped to bring to power yet another Orban-type politician in Slovakia, who would undermine European and Euro solidarity in times of crisis. The Ramstein format, created thanks to the leadership of the United States, was essentially the first attempt to remedy the limited efficiency of the global security institution. In Ramstein format, I calculated more than 50 countries, more than 50 participants in this Ramstein format. It was not only NATO countries, it was different countries. It became a new club. And because they had been exploring just one type of response to aggression, a compromise at the cost of the victim. The issue of Ukraine's accession will tell if NATO is ready to act in the new era, the era in which everything has been weaponized. Food security, migrants, the media, the cyberspace, supply chains for various goods, religious organizations, access to medicine, and more. Ukraine has hands-on experience of standing up to the new challenges. At the risk of generalizing, the world is now facing a deepening rift between the two opposing groups. On the one side, you have the countries that see a human life as the highest value, where dignity and freedom are of paramount importance. On the other side, you have the countries that see human lives as expendable. Meat assault tactics of the Russian army tell you more about the very essence of Russia than the words of any. They use their soldiers as a cannon fodder. They use the meat grinder tactics. I saw it personally in the front line. The war in Ukraine will settle which group gets to write the rules that become the global norm, and what mechanism we will have to enforce these rules. There is no avoiding changes. We will have no make decisions. Therefore, global change is coming. Whether the change will result from the World War III or from an inclusive discussion after a joint punishment for the aggressor state is being currently decided in Ukraine. That is the true answer to what next for Ukraine. What brought us to this juncture? The roots of the problem reach the last days of the Cold War. It's my personal humble opinion. The collapse of the Warsaw Pact and the USSR changed the balance of power and led to an unprecedented de-escalation. Ukraine giving up the third largest nuclear arsenal in the world was an important episode in this process. De-escalation allowed to redirect trillions of dollars towards warfare programs. But at a certain point, though de-escalation led to the degradation of security institutions of the free world, Russia and Russians, among others, came to believe that the West was divided and weak. The reasons for this belief accumulated over the years. In the early 19th, Russia essentially seized a part of Moldova and installed their proxy regime there. It's called Transnistria or Pridnestrovia. At the same time, Russia has been stoking the conflict between Armenia and Azerbaijan in order to increase its hold over the region. The first attempt to orchestrate a separatist coup in Crimea occurred in 1994-95. Ukraine thwarted the attempt coup. In 2003, Russians tried to annex the Ukrainian island of Tuzla in the Kerch Strait during the condition of President Leonid Kuchma. He personally told me this story. He come back from the Brasilia to Ukraine to stop there in the Tuzla island. Ukraine mounted though resistance to the heedless attack, but was essentially abandoned with the aggressor. The security guarantees of the Budapest Memorandum failed the reality test. In 2004, Russia was actively involved in an attempt to falsify the Ukrainian presidential election. You know, this time maybe we call it Orange Revolution. I literally have first-hand experience of this story because I represented the Democratic candidate Viktor Yushchenko in court as his lawyer. I was in the Supreme Court during the hearing. It was an Orange court hearing, and we won. But Europe was sliding ever deeper into dependency of the Kremlin. It culminated in Putin's infamous Munich speech in 2007. He literally announced the end of de-escalation. What was the result? Germany and France blocked Ukraine's and Georgia, Sakartvelo, NATO prospects. Next came Russia's attack on Georgia. The West's response was outright shameful. The Kremlin developed a clear algorithm. The Russians press on and the West retreats. The West is reactive and willing to compromise at the cost of the victim of the aggression. That laid the ground for 2014. In 2014, the cycle repeated. Russia occupied Crimea and parts of Donbass. The Budapest Memorandum didn't work. The sanctions imposed at the time were so weak and inconsistent that they did nothing but fuel the Kremlin's appetites. There has been no response but the philosophy of don't provoke the Russians. I want to place a special emphasis on this. Complaining about what the West did or didn't do is easy. Recognizing one's own mistake is harder. And we have made plenty in the first 2 days of Ukraine's independence. Our actions have made the work easier for the Kremlin when it tried to sell its war description of Ukraine to the West. Like an evil stepmother, bad-mouthing Cinderella, Russia wanted to persuade the West that Ukraine was not independent or capable. It's high time we discarded this stereotype. So what does Ukraine really represent? Let me start by saying this. Within the context of the situation in Israel, in Russia, an angry crowd seized the airport in Makhachkala and nearly started a Jewish pogrom. Despite the ongoing war in Ukraine, such incidents are impossible. Both Jewish rabbis and Muslim imams support our soldiers at the front throughout the war. The only threat to Jews and Muslims in Ukraine is the Russians. Russians spent decades promoting the false narrative about rampant Nazism and anti-Semitism in Ukraine. Turned out that the Nazis had been in Russia all along. Nevertheless, the West ate up this drivel with a spoon. Why? Because Washington, Berlin, and Paris had only seen Ukraine through the crooked mirror of Moscow, literally. Where were the bureaus of the leading media that covered the events in Ukraine? In Moscow. Who was believed to be expert on Ukraine? Sovietologists and Russian studies specialists, who were automatically assumed to know the entire space that had once been ruled from Moscow. Some of them had been the Kremlin's agents of influence, I can say as much. Those who understood Ukraine and the Ukrainian nation as a sovereign subjects were few. It's crucial. The Kremlin's misinformation easily disproved if you look at the Ukrainian without Moscow mediation. Please raise your hand if you have been to Kiev. Good. If you haven't, I highly recommend it. If in the city center stands the glorious St. Sophia Cathedral, a millennium old. It's recognized as a UNESCO World Heritage Site. Its ancient frescoes depict one of the cathedral founders, Prince Yaroslav the Wise, with his family. In the 11th century, he ruled a giant state with the center in Kiev. Yaroslav's great-grandson, Yuri Dolgoruki, who is also buried in Kiev, founded Moscow some 150 years after St. Sophia Cathedral has been built. Our ancestors have been living graffiti on St. Sophia's walls for 1,000 years. Present day, Ukrainians can read it because this is the old version of our language. Therefore, we have a tangible and revealing symbol of our millennia-long historic continuity. The Russian regime's maniacal desire to control Kiev is reminiscent of the biblical account of firstborn rights. They see themselves as an empire and are deeply traumatized whenever someone falls to obey them. This is why they are trying to cancel Ukraine and Ukrainians. Whether the Russian leadership claims that the Ukrainians are an invented nation, or say something about the unity between Ukrainians and Russians, this is a pure madness. Kremlin made denial of whole states and nations a part of their state policy. This is Nazism, pure and simple. Nazism is the official Russian ideology. The Ukrainian nation has lost its statehood several times, that's true, and that had always led to a tragedy. In 2 weeks' time, we will mark the 90th anniversary of Holodomor, the maid famine of 1932-33, and we remember its victims. It was an act of genocide committed by the Stalinist regime against Ukraine. The lowest confirmed number of victims stands at 4 million. This is directly linked to the present. 2 years ago, in November, 2 years ago, I visited Washington as the defense minister and asked for weapons. I have been told that it was impossible to give Ukraine stingers and what we shouldn't provoke the Russians. I was telling my colleagues that Ukrainians would fight for their state, whether we were given military aid or not, that we wouldn't capitulate it even if we were abandoned, because Ukrainian knows that Russian rule brings. When I met some European colleagues, I understood that we have the same values. But if Europeans from some countries will choose between value of security and value of freedom, they will choose security. In Ukraine, we will use freedom and we will fight. Bucha, Izum, Mariupol, and many other cities where Russians had been committing mass crimes were yet another illustration of what we already knew. As Russians were approaching Kiev, I gave the orders and we handed out 20,000 assault rifles Kalashnikov within the span of 2 days. Teachers, construction workers, accountants, students, men and women of all ages took up arms to protect their city. In whole Ukraine, it was more than 100,000 during 3 and 4 days, only for the territorial defense forces. Had Russians entered our capital, they would have faced hell. This happened in every town and every city. Locals met Russians with the Molotov cocktails or tried to stop them with their bare hands. When analysts in the United States said that Kyiv would fall within 3 days, followed by the whole of Ukraine within a week or fortnight, it was clear that the authors of these predictions knew nothing about Ukrainians. I recognize that the American military and political leadership was understandably apprehensive after what had happened in Afghanistan. The intelligence predicted that Afghanistan would hold for months, but the defense crumbled within mere days. What I found the most startling is that the West failed to believe its own success story. Ever since Ukraine regained independence in 1991, the United States, Canada, and Europe have extended colossal assistance to help it transform from a Soviet country to a democracy. The country developed a strong civil society and private sector. The former Cinderella had changed dramatically, but public perception lagged behind. The war was seen as a battle between large Soviet army and small Soviet army. This is why prediction was unfavorable to us. But we are not Soviet army, not small, not big. We are Ukrainian army, especially after the 8 years from the first day of invention, 2014 in Crimea and partly Donbass. But the public, the government, the army, the Ukrainian state would have been proven to be much stronger than the world expected. The negative claims you might hear of our country are significantly exaggerated. Quite often they are outright lies. A whole new generation has grown up in an independent Ukraine. Our generals never served in Soviet army, like General Zaluzhny and General Mysyuk, Shaptala, Zabrodsky, and others. They served 30 years in Ukraine, not in Soviet army. And it's our great tragedy that these young people are currently being killed at the front. Nevertheless, it's obvious that the Ukrainian nation will not accept the Russian rule. What helped us to survive at the critical moment? First, I would note the role of President Volodymyr Zelensky personally. It was especially critical on the first day when many went into shock. The president stayed in Kyiv. I was with him on the first day in his bunker and saw him. And despite every prediction, the risk of finding himself under siege and the threat to his life from infiltrators and missiles, ensuring that the country remained governable. You know the quote, "I don't need right, I need weapon." In this, he differed from the president of Afghanistan. It's likely that the enemy expected that the Ukrainian government to crumble, inner destabilization to take over, and Ukraine to fall easy prey. That didn't happen. I also stayed in Kyiv and managed outing to the front. I slept for them not more than 2 or 3 hours a day, and occasionally I posting pictures from the streets to show that the leadership stayed in the capital. Second, I would like to know the role of the entire nation and every component of the defense forces. We survived the first 3 toughest months thanks to the self-organizations of Ukrainians that united to resist the enemy. And thanks to the massive heroism of our soldiers. Our soldiers and generals have proved, although Russia might have the second strongest military in the world, it doesn't stand a chance in Ukraine. And we have a joke that after the coup d'etat of Prigozhin, the second world army in the world became the second army in the Russia. Hundreds of thousands of people enlisted. We conducted mobilization very quickly. We had a shortage of everything. Soldiers would go in the battle in their jeans and sneakers, but they gave us time to organize defense and supply lines. Millions supported the army, supplying everything is needed. that showed institutions of civil society at work. For Ukrainians, this is a war of national liberation. Let me note that Ukrainian army includes hundreds of thousands of Russian-speaking Ukrainians and tens of thousands of ethnic Russians that lived happily in Ukraine, and now fighting against the Russian onslaught, because they all want to live in a free country. The Kremlin claims that they have come to Ukraine to protect the Russian language, and the Russian are total lie. The Russian army had killed tens of thousands of civilians, the vast majority of them Russian-speaking. Mariupol, Volnovakha, Kharkiv, Izum, Kupiansk, and others. Russia has destroyed dozens of towns like Mariupol, Bakhmut, Severodonetsk, and many others. In them, people lived and spoke Russian. So let me reiterate, this is no local conflict. Russia wants to destroy Ukraine and erase Ukrainians. This is an existential war. The third factor was the international assistance. Once we gained the trust of our international partners, a broad coalition was formed to support Ukraine. Nothing of the scale had been seen since the anti-Hitler coalition. President Zelensky has done a fantastic job communicating with the leaders, parliaments, and nations of many countries. I did my part, including the Ramstein format as the defense minister and member of the government. I am deeply grateful to Secretary of Defense Lloyd Austin for his outstanding leadership in the face of unprecedented challenges, and to his whole team. We have worked jointly at 14 meetings in the Ramstein format and a number of separate tracks. That was the path of a rapid and large-scale evolution from the Stinger is impossible and F-16 is possible. After extensive communication by late March 2022, I have managed to persuade our partners that Ukraine needs 155mm caliber artillery. And the first decision regarding M777 were passed in April, and we got it in May. Our artillery family began to emerge. Various countries began to provide their own 155mm caliber guns. The French Caesars, Polish Kreb, German Panzergaubitze, M109, different modification, and more. In June 2022, the Western 155mm caliber guns became the first game changers on the battlefield, followed by HIMARS, M270, and others. An approach based on creating thematic coalitions to jointly provide a certain type of weapons from various countries was fine-tuned with artillery and became one of the key elements of the Ramstein format. The model was subsequently used with the tanks, armored vehicles, air defense systems, aviation, and more. Certainly, I would like also to know the efforts of the Ukrainian team here in the United States, Special Ambassador to the United States, Oksana Markarova and her teams, Defense Attaché Boris Kremenetsky and his teams. We felt their support every day and every night. Doesn't matter what time on your watch. We have unprecedentedly dynamic cooperation with our American partners. Ukrainians will be forever grateful to those who supported us in our hour of need, each is their own way. Some sent us weapons, some let in our women and children and provided them with protection. Our gratitude knows no bounds. Also, I'm especially grateful to the soldiers of the Foreign Legion. People from various countries came to Ukraine to fight for freedom. Some have fallen, and we will forever honor them as heroes. To sum up the block about the war's global dimension and the sense of Ukraine, I don't remember who said it first. I believe it could have been Senator Lindsey Graham, who said that supporting Ukraine was a fantastic investment for the USA. From a 2-3% of American annual defense budget, we have destroyed the Russian regular army that has been training for 10 years and the stockpiles that were being amassed since the Soviet days. We have destroyed the armies that were supposed to attack NATO. Just remember the Madrid summit, 10 years strategy of NATO, the main threats of NATO recognized as the Russia Federation. but the aggressor state has achieved partial success occupying parts of Ukrainian territory. And it has allies equally invested in undermining the values of the free world. If Russia achieves anything resembling success, this will cause more conflicts across the globe. We see clearly that Russia, Iran, China, and North Korea form one side. Moscow's current allies can stoke the flames of war in other countries where Americans will have no choice but to fight and die. Now, we see how quickly the opponents of the free world have created an informal coalition. Both Russians fighting in Ukraine and Hamas fighting in Israel get weapons from the Iran and the North Korea. Hamas is using drones in the way they could only have learned from Russians. I kept telling my colleagues that it was only a matter of time before the technologies and methods that our enemies have perfected in Ukraine cropped up in other regions. This is why we should act without delays. So how we set this right? In a word, first, Russia needs to lose on the battlefield. Second, the world obviously needs new security architecture. Third, we need an inclusive dialogue between responsible states. This is only path towards a sustainable and just peace in reconstruction. The path to the world in which democratic countries, inspired by the example of the United States, no longer face destruction. This is our logic. The details I would need to be done. I think that's a good point for our discussion. Thank you for your attention. I am ready and I open. Thank you. Sorry, it was not TED Talks 8 minutes. Next time I will be.
Well, we'll have to have you back for next time. We'll try to keep our questions short so that the very large audience can participate as well. In many ways, as Defense Minister, you achieved the unimaginable, and you were able to coax the world into giving up its existing weapon stocks in a way that made it possible for Ukraine to hold off and defeat the second largest army in the world, as you mentioned in your talk. We can get a sense of how that was possible from your talk now. In other words, Washington, it's easy to be cynical about our politics here, but in the end of ends, often the most compelling argument wins the day, and you are remarkably compelling in your arguments about the role of Ukraine in our security, as well as Europe's. But going forward, it seems like things are a little bit more difficult. It's harder to get countries to produce for the Ukrainian war effort than it was to get them to give up their existing stocks. The politics of investment are different from the politics of distribution and sharing. And we have difficulties in the United States in our own politics, but also the United States is put in a different situation now than it was at the onset of this war. We have a crisis in the Middle East. There may be a widening war with one of our allies there. There's the constant threat of China and Iran more broadly. So I want to get a sense of whether the strategy that you were able to successfully pursue for Ukraine in the first, year and a half of this war is going to be successful going forward. In other words, can you continue to rely on the West for the supply of the weapons that Ukraine needs to defend itself and to retake its territory? And if not, what's the strategy for Ukraine's security going forward? At one point, Ukraine was a remarkable weapons producer, and you still have a very innovative population that continues to develop new types of weapons. Is there some prospect of independence in the ability to supply your military needs in the relatively near future? Or if not, is it going to require some type of change in Ukrainian strategy to adjust to new realities in our contemporary context, where it's a bit harder to pull the weapons from the arsenal of democracy that has been depleted?
I'm sure.
Look it up. Or just take this.
Okay. I'm sure that we have reliable partners in the West because I saw the eyes of my colleagues, Minister of Defense, during our Ramstein meetings. And always they told me, Oleksii, we will stand with you as long as it takes. It was not like a political quote for the people. It was private communication. They really believe that we can defeat Russians, when we can beat them, we can stop them, and we can win. And our partners in Western world became co-partners of this future victory. It's in their interest. They understood that we are staying on the east wall of the Europe. It's the interest of their people not to die in the battlefield, not to pay by their blood. We are paying by our blood. They have to pay by their money, their weaponry, their ammunition. And I think that they understood that. But you're absolutely right. In our strategy, we have to think on a forecast approach that Russia will our neighbor after then we will win this war. They will our neighbor. And we need to wait when they became the more democratic country. It should be refederalization of the Russia Federation. And I see in my mind that we will see this scenario. We will see independent Tatarstan, Bashkirstan, and other republics of the Russia Federation. And we have to build up our industry for our independence. Doesn't matter who is the prime minister of some partners country or president. We need to produce our weaponry, personally. We will have stamp combat testing in Ukraine, and we will sell to your country, you will buy it. We joked with Lloyd Austin that, Oleksii, you will have more Patriots than me in your armed forces. But seriously, we discussed armed forces concept, future force concept of Ukraine, because it's in interest of Ukraine and it's in interest of Europe. That's why we persuade giant of military industrial to open branches in Ukraine, like Biosystems. I signed the memorandum with them in August, probably, that they will open the branch in Ukraine. They will start production of the artillery equipment in Ukraine. They say would be with the Rheinmetall from the Germany and others. So our strategy to build up, to develop right now during this wartime, doesn't matter when this war will end, because we will need to stop them for next decades, because Russian will try to have revenge after 10 years or 15 years, 20 years, I don't know, if they will not have serious, dramatic changes in their, from the autocracy to the democracy.
Thank you, Minister. Representing the Department of Foreign Policy and Global Security, I'm going to ask you a sort of a two-pronged question, part of which is a foreign policy focus, part a global security. I'm not sure if you would have had the opportunity to see Mike Maffal's article just today in Foreign Policy. I recommend it to everybody. It's an opinion which is making the argument, Mike's making the argument that supporting Ukraine is in the US interest. And I want to, you referenced that just a moment ago, but I want to invite you to develop further the argument for why the United States should support Ukraine because it is in the United States' interest. Because I think that there is an increasing number of people in the United States, including here in Washington, who are not so clear on that argument. And it is a very important argument. The global security part of my question, you referenced looking forward, looking to the future. Institutions which have failed Ukraine, institutions that are already fragile in many ways we know about, the need for a new security architecture, and also the sort of the weaponization of everything. And so as we look at a future global security structure, I think there's a really interesting question about how we define limits as to what we think about as being appropriately in the security space and what sorts of things are outside of the security space. Speaking as a former diplomat who sometimes rails at how the military can define everything as being within their area of responsibility, I would invite you to kind of address the question of what should be within the military's area of responsibility and what is outside of it.
First question, a little bit easier for me, because I have an argument why it's in the interest of the United States to support Ukraine. I tried to remind you the Madrid summit and strategy of NATO for next 10 years. The main threat for NATO is Russia Federation, recognized. And as I have different communications with the Minister of Defense, especially in Europe, especially in NATO countries, they were sure that the main contributor of the NATO is the United States. So that if in any case, NATO will switch on Article number 5, the first country who will fight would be United States. It means that in the interest of the United States to reduce war capacity of Russian armed forces, it means that you will save lives of your soldiers. You will not pay by your blood. It's absolutely a realistic scenario if Russia will start conflict with Finland or Sweden or Poland or Baltic countries. They have Russian-speaking population in Estonia. Casus belli, easy. They will start the conflict in Estonia. And Estonia is a member of the NATO. You have to start to defend them. That means that you have to invest in Ukraine in battlefield right now for reducing their capability. We will ruin their professional corps. We will destroy their tanks, aircrafts, artillery, ammunition, etc., etc. It will save lives of your soldiers, your people. And second, United States is a very pragmatical country. It means that you are an interest to develop your industry, raise more funds to pay more salaries to your workers and get more taxes. You have to test it, your weaponry. You have to understand, is it doable on the battlefield? For example, HIMARS, very, very recognized weaponry. But you know that Russian using electronic warfare and jamming HIMARS missiles, only 25% of precising we have with the HIMARS. It means you need to continue developing, researching, and constructing your shield. You have a partner. You have a testing polygon, honestly, absolutely. Cynically. Yeah, cynically, but you have a polygon. You can use this polygon like an opportunity to check your weaponry and develop, produce something more modern, like Germany. They gave us IRIS-T air defense systems. Bundeswehr has not any systems of IRIS-T. They gave us this, and they will see how is provide these systems. Second question, I have no images of this future security architecture. We are working with this question, and I would like to work together with you. And we need to scratch it, and after that, build up. But I absolutely sure that Security Council in UN should be reshuffling. We have to cancel veto right for the aggressor. We have to reshuffle OSCE. It's impotent. Or International Red Cross organization. Nothing. When I met Monsieur Morer in Kyiv, it's a president of International Red Cross organization. He came to Kyiv from Moscow, and we discussed the humanitarian corridors and options to change the bodies, corpse of killed in action soldiers from both sides. And I asked him, "Do you have the options to persuade Russians?" Answer was not. They have no influence. And we need to find something new one, like it was after the First World War. League of Nations was canceled. After the Second World War, we got UN. I hope that the real World War III will not start literally, but all process means that in this war, we have involvement of Russian, Iran, North Korea. It's allies. And other countries support us. Also, we have allies. We are fighting, they support us. It's so kind of third world war in the picture. We need to stop it. We need to win.
Excellent. Thank you very much. I think we're going to open it up to the floor. There are two microphones, one on either side of the room. And if you just line up behind the microphones, we'll begin to take questions. I think it's fascinating to think about the idea that, we always think of global institutions and world order as being reshaped in the wake of war. And this war has revealed the failure of the post-World War II institutions, and we're in need of significant reforms. Very useful insight. Thank you very much. All right. Let's start on the right side of the room. And if you could introduce yourself first, that would be great. And questions, not statements. That's our rule here. So go quick to the question.
Well, thank you, Minister Reznikov, for your very inspiring conversation today. I want to bring your attention to the ongoing counteroffensive, which is unfolding in eastern Ukraine. So many observers in the West believe that it has not been able to stand the test of Western expectations, but there have been some successful strides in the other theaters, such as in Black Sea. So I want to ask you, do you think that the limited success and challenges that Ukrainian armed forces have faced in eastern Ukraine during the counteroffensive campaign is going to sort of undermine the overall Western support for Ukraine? And do you think the increasing opposition or domestic opposition within the United States is going to have some strategic impact of the entire Western support to Ukraine? Thank you.
Thank you very much. I will answer the second question because I really seriously, honestly believe in bilateral, bipartisan support of Ukraine. Doesn't matter who will be in the White House. I also felt it when I met different congressmen, senators, when they come to Ukraine. And that's, I seriously believe in that. Counteroffensive. It's a serious psychological problem in the world. My wife, she has some experience in psychological fields, and she told me that the formula of all conflicts, especially among the people, is overestimation of your expectations. You have overestimation of your expectation. After that, you see result. This result is not good for you. The reaction emotional is aggression, and you want to get revenge. It's a formula of all conflicts in business, in family, in university, etc. And our preparation for the counteroffensive was overestimated by the media, by the politicians, and people also overestimated. But the war is not the blockbuster, Hollywood blockbuster. Yes, if we will remember the autumn 2022 two operations, Kharkiv and Kherson. Yes, really, in Kharkiv, it was very rapid operation. But I can say you honestly at this moment that Kharkiv was a shape operation. It was a shape operation in, say, Kherson operation. That's why Russian was not prepared. We used our air assault units with the Bushmasters from the Australia. They break through the defending lines, not prepared Russians. And we were on the Oskol River very, very, very quickly. I traveled to the Ramstein that night and got the messages every two. I was surprised that is going on the battlefield. And early morning, I discussed with the Lloyd Austin, Mark Milley. It was in Europe, in Brussels. And Oleksii, what's going on? We are successful. We are on the river, Oskol River, near the Kupiansk. But it was surprise for us also. But Kherson, we also overestimated this campaign. We're using HIMARS, we're cutting their logistic lines, their fuel depot, we destroyed their fuel depot, ammunition depot. But it spent probably 3 or 4 months before Russian made decision to flee with their and withdraw their units from the Kherson, right bank of the Dnipro River. That's why when we starting next campaign, preparation for the next campaign in the south, in Zaporizhian direction and simultaneously in Bakhmut, also it was, okay, it would be like in Kharkiv. But it's overestimation, it's a wartime. They did a serious preparation in this place with the 3 lines of minefields, tank ambulances, etc., etc. But I'm sure that this is not the main battle. It's one of the battle of this big war. But it's very important to move forward because we will have the chance to have a fire control of their logistic lines from the peninsula Crimea to the east. That's the main idea. It's not the idea to win this war in Tokmak direction. It's a strategic plan for the next battle, for the next year. But you're absolutely right, because it was overestimated, this expectation. It could be like a reason, okay, right, Ukrainians didn't get the result, so why we have to continue support them? That's why we need to deliver our messages. We discussed with the students what you can do for us. You can fight with the fatigue syndrome with your friends, with your relatives, and trying to deliver them the message that it's a war, it's a tough time, but we need to continue this support because we have only one scenario. Ukraine have to win this war with Western partners.
Thank you, sir.
Thank you. Let's move to the left side.
Hello, thank you. I'm Henry. I'm a graduate student studying U.S. foreign policy here. So I wanted to mention there are many wars around the world at any given time, in Burma, in Ethiopia, up till recently in Sudan. Why is the war in Ukraine so much more seemingly impactful or talked about in regards to global security? And why has it had such a place in the public consciousness more than many of these other conflicts?
Cool question.
The charisma of the defense minister.
Thank you. First of all, it's a first war in the globe after the Second World War with this massive intensivity, with the using all type of weaponry, exclude nuke. So normal consumption of ammunition against us from the February 2022 till probably autumn of 2022 also, it was 60,000 rounds, different types, different calibers per day. Just imagine 60,000 rounds per day means 600,000 per 10 days, 1,800,000 per month. We used 20,000 per day, different types. I mean, mines, rounds, artillery shells, etc., etc. Just imagine, you will not find other conflicts, other wars in the world with this intensivity. From us, fighting approximately 450,000 Russian soldiers alongside of all territory, all borders. I mean, Belarus, East, and temporarily occupied territories. Land component, 350,000 on the land component, plus Navy, plus aviation, approximately 455, 500,000. And from our side, you will not find the same situation in our world. And in June this year, I was in the Security Forum Shangri-La in Singapore. And I described to my partners, Minister of Defense, in this meeting, that the war in Ukraine has an impact to the Asia countries, to the Pacific Ocean countries, because Ukrainian grain, Ukrainian sunflower oil, Ukrainian corn was the main food for the Africa countries and Asia countries. When we restored grain corridor in the Black Sea alongside of our seashore and Bulgaria, Romania, and Turkey, we opened against the options to cook bread in Vietnam, Cambodia, and Laos and other countries. It's a global impact, the war in Ukraine. That's why we have to think about, because it's a globalization pushing some shot in Ukraine has a resonance in Asia or in Africa or in Australia or New Zealand and others.
Thank you very much. Why don't we take a couple of questions? We'll group some because we're running a little bit short on time. So we'll take three actually from this side of the room, and you'll answer whichever component of them you see fit.
And then we'll take three from over
Yeah.
there.
All right. Hi, my name is Ethan. I'm a freshman. And I was just wondering that now F-16s have been secured, that is it worth it or possible to procure maybe more advanced sensor packages or America's stock of air-launched cruise missiles, along with maybe even like Gripen and the Meteor missile from Sweden? Do you think that that might be possible or even worth it to the Ukrainian armed forces?
You absolutely. Okay, but I have to fix it.
So hi, my name is Sichu, and I'm an international student from China, and here at SIS for graduate program. I have actually two questions, but I'll try to make it short. The first one is, how would you value the sustainability since the war is becoming an attrition, I think, for both sides? How would you rate the sustainability for both Ukraine and Russia? And the second question is because I know a lot of focus is on how China is trying to support Russia in this war, but I'm also currently working on a research paper on China-Russia alliance after the invasion. So I was thinking, do you have any opinion on, like, because we see China is still hesitate in joining actually the war effort. So how would you say, is there any optimal, like optimistic approaches to stop China from being more close to Russia, at least, or maybe even have China supporting Ukraine in this war effort? Thanks.
Hello, my name is Caden. I'm a junior in SIS this school. I would like to thank you, Minister, for coming here. Personally, for me, and I know for hundreds of thousands of people around the world, they will always remember you standing there in Kyiv in the first few days of the invasion. I feel like for so many people, you were one of the main faces that rallied for the defense of Ukraine. So I know the name of this event is called What's Next for Ukraine, but I'm curious, what's next for you? How are you going to be working to help? How are you going to be working to help promote Ukraine? And what's next for you in your amazing career? Thank you.
I absolutely sure that priority number one for Ukraine still remains air defense systems. And aerial platform is a part of air defense systems. We have to ruin domination of Russians in air. At this moment, we have in our air defense forces two types of aircrafts, MiG-29 and Su. Sukhoi. Old-fashioned, old Soviet fashion. MiG-29 can see using the locator radars on the range 60 kilometers and hit the target using the missiles and others on a range 30 kilometers. Russian armed forces has Su-35 modern model. They can see more than 200 kilometers using the radars and hit the target on a distance 140-50 kilometers. So the answer is understandable. We have no chance to ruin their domination with the MiG-29 and other aircrafts. That's why I started persuading my partners that we need modern aircrafts like aerial platform with the missiles, bombs, rockets, etc. And the most quantity of aircrafts in the world is F-16. For example, French partners suggest us their Mirage, but Mirage can see also 60 kilometers and hit 30 kilometers. This is not solution. F-16 can see and can hit. When I was in Sweden, I was in a Saab industry office and discussed the options about the Gripen. It's also very interesting platform with the good options, with the good weaponry. So, and I understood that they will be ready to give us Gripen also as well when they became the full-fledged member of NATO allies. It's very important for them in security reason. And we sent our training assessment mission in July or August, when I was the minister, to the Sweden. Our pilots tested Gripen, come back and say, Minister, perfect. So we are ready to have two types of aircrafts, F-16 and Gripen, instead of MiG-29 and Sukhoi. So I'm absolutely sure that we will have F-16 and we will have Gripen. As a part of air defense systems, we will ruin their domination in air and we will moving forward with our counteroffensive next battle. China. Super. Again, when I was in Shangri-La, a security forum in Singapore, and the panel, I was with the former ambassador of China in the United States, and he also deputy minister of foreign affairs, very smart and wise gentleman, and we were in the same panel. And in that period of time, we heard different initiatives with the mediation, negotiation, trying to find the peace formula in our meaning, in China meaning, Indonesian meaning, and Arabic countries meaning. But I saw that all their suggestion was in the interest of Russia, not in the interest of Ukraine. And I told to ambassador, but publicly with the auditory, not told, I asked him politely, is it true that in the China language, you have no meaning equal brothers? You have oldest brother and youngest brother. Is it true? It's different, not equal, because twins, somebody oldest 1 minute, somebody youngest. When China, under the leadership of Mao Zedong, signed their friendship agreement with the Soviet Union under the leadership of the Stalin, the meaning of their relationship was that Soviet Union is the oldest brother and China is the youngest brother. It was not in the respect of the China people, but it's true. When Mr. Xi or Xi, how it's correct? Xi. Okay, Mr. Xi come to Moscow and they signed a new agreement between China and Russia with the Putin about the friendship, etc., etc. I heard rumors that in this agreement, China became the oldest brother and Russia became the youngest brother. And I asked ambassador in Singapore during this panel that oldest brother have to say to youngest brother to withdraw their armed forces from Ukraine. And after that, we will decide about the negotiation table and perspective. I think that China is watching and trying to understand what would be the result of this invasion. Might is right, or rule of law is right. And I hope that the meeting in San Francisco has a historical meaning, not only between the United States and China. It means historical meaning for Ukraine and the world also. So let's send text to your relatives about the oldest brothers and youngest brother. Next for me. I have a job immune in this period, and I'm trying to find the best way for me. And our meeting here, it's my test, it's my attempt to understand, is it a good idea to have a show with the lectures in a university of the world, like Sorbonne, like Stanford, Harvard, Princeton, because I have an invitation to fly to the Japan in December, but I try to feel what you need, what I can to deliver you, what my added value to you. If it's doable, I will do it. And according to Ukrainian law, it's anti-corruption law. And I think it's the same situation in the United States. You call it round door politics, revolving doors, or garden seating. Yeah, they're saying I have to be 1 year far away from the defense sector, in business meaning. But I have a lot of ideas because I know what we need for the future force of Ukraine. And my idea, after 1 year, to be ready to join with some production industry companies, because I know what we need, like drones, UAVs, et cetera, et cetera. So, but this period of time, I enjoyed my life with my wife. I spent time in mountains, jogging, driving, because I like quadricycle and UAVs. I'm a champion of Ukraine before the war, yes, and master of sport. So I know what means mountains, smooth, forest, and etc. And use this time. And I'm fixing my memories for the next book.
I know I promised this side of the room 3 questions, but we are getting close to time. And I actually think that's a very good way to wrap up. So I guess I would encourage you to come up after we close, and you can ask your questions directly.
And we have some cookies, and I know the minister is willing to stay, that Mr. Reznikov is willing to stay a little longer. So we can move out there, and we promise that the folks over there will have the opportunity to speak with Mr. Reznikov. We hope everybody, I'm just to say, so happy to see this room full and full of students. And so I hope that Mr. Reznikov has gotten the message from this group that he definitely has something to contribute. And please join me in thanking him so much.